Kevin, thank you for joining us today.
Great to be here, Dennis.
So we're interested in learning about VUMC, Vanderbilt University Medical Center, and your journey into the world of Microsoft Intune and squeezing value out of your Microsoft 365 licenses.
Yep.
Can you maybe start by telling us a bit about your personal journey and your time at Vanderbilt? Because I understand you've been a boomerang employee there.
Yeah. So I've had a few journeys with VMC. I started at VMC about a decade ago, really in more of a desktop support role. That's kind of how I started my IT career, was as many do, in doing desktop support. Transitioned from that into doing VDI work, back in 2013. So it was pretty early days for VDI. And, enjoyed that, but then, we were going through some transitions in around 2014. I decided to leave and take a different position somewhere else. And, realized very quickly that probably wasn't the best move, that the grass was not greener, how that usually goes. And decided to come back about a year and change later, and went into a role in IT doing relationship management. So more of a BRM, CRM role, being kind of a infrastructure liaison between lines of businesses and the infrastructure teams to fulfill different project needs and things where IT needs were. But in the back of my mind, I was really missing being more of a technical role. I love dealing with customers. I love solving challenges, but I missed having the ability to have a little bit more direct input. I left that role and took a walkabout, if you will, with VMware, because I had that VDI experience, and they were looking for some folks that had that here in Nashville, and did that for a little bit. Had some good times working for. It was kind of during the transition when they went from Airwatch to Workspace ONE.
Yeah.
So the role was later on transitioned to customer success, but at the time was a technical account specialist, and got some great exposure to their customers here in Nashville, and had a lot of really good insight into the challenges that pretty much everybody faces. That's really what I learned in a very short amount of time. Was that the problems that I saw internally were everywhere. There's when you work at large organizations, the bureaucracy kind of lends itself to certain challenges, and that translates pretty much universally to all industries. So I missed my team. I missed the people that I worked with. I missed being in an office, to be frank. And so, I ended up coming back to VMC and going really hardcore technical, working on our virtual desktop team, helping during the transition to Epic, getting that kind of performant and tuned and very down in the weeds technical, and a position open on our cloud services team, and decided to go that route. And that happened shortly before COVID, that I transitioned from kind of our VMware Horizon View team to our cloud services team. And right off the bat, we kicked off kind of our big initiative to that did a few different things. One of those things was we, as a organization, separated from the university.
Yes,
several years ago from a legal perspective, but we still shared a lot of technology. We shared the same domain, so we needed to undergo transitioning a lot of that into our own space as a medical center, as our own entity. But at the same time, we had a need to make better use of our Microsoft 365 investment. When we did the transition originally, we stood up our own tenant. We had our own subscription with Microsoft 365 when we split from VU, but hadn't yet gone down the road of really transitioning to the modern workplace concepts, modern management, a lot of that. So shortly before COVID hit, we got together, and we can go into some more of that in the next couple of minutes. Yeah.
And it's funny you talk about your role and going into that team. I can still remember the day Scott told me I had this awesome guy joining the team from in-house who was going to bring great skills. So I'm really happy for you, that was you, and that you came back to the organization, brought all that experience and wisdom from your walkabouts.
And I've been so fortunate to have the opportunities that I've had to wear all the different hats, to really understand the business, but also understand all the technology that enables the business, because it's afforded me a really unique perspective, and that's I love showing up to work because I'm able to connect those dots.
You can, and you've had a broad perspective across the organization from the different roles. So maybe let's start there. Let's talk a little bit about the size and complexity and diversity of the organization.
Sure.
Maybe just talk about how many users, how many devices, how many locations, and how you categorize your devices and users, because it's quite fascinating some of the language you use.
Yeah, so how many is a number that changes very frequently as of
changing every day.
Recently, we just acquired 2 hospitals in the last year and a half, and are about to do another one. And so I think at the moment we're right around 41,000 licensed accounts. And we typically think of a workforce member as somebody who is VUMC employed. They're a licensed account typically. So right around 41K. Device-wise, we have a similar number of Windows endpoints, domain joined endpoints, excuse me. And I think the breakdown there is that about 7,500 of those are our shared clinical workstations. We call them CWSs. The CWS platform is a very tightly controlled, governed platform that is what would otherwise be a thin client at many other organizations. We have a variety of reasons for not going that route yet, but it's very print, the same copy thousands of times.
Yeah. And these are the machines that, when you're walking on the corridor of the hospital, these are the machines that are in the alcove in between every 2 patients.
Well, they're in the patient room, they're in the exam room, they're in outpatient areas, inpatient areas, they're whiteboards on the wall, they're pretty much anywhere that there is a direct patient engagement, interaction, encounter, that is going to be a prime place for CWS. Yeah. So stepping back from that, we still have centrally managed devices that we call administrative workstations, AWSs. Obviously, AWS got otherwise used by another AWS, but things that we got there first. Yeah, exactly. We got there first. Bezos. But those administrative workstations, we have about, I want to say around 14 to 15,000 of those.
Okay.
And those are largely some of them are in patient care areas where they may not fit the mold of what this tightly controlled clinical workstation platform is.
Okay.
Like a
nursing station.
Diabetes clinic might need a bunch of very specific software that really, for the glucometers, that doesn't really fit well in the image with all the other clinical workstations, things like that. Yeah. So it ranges from that to more of your traditional back office, finance, HR, IT, revenue cycle, all of those kinds of users, and those devices are strewn about both main campus down the street here and also pretty much all over.
So you said 14 or 15,000
AWS machines, and so
7,500 clinical workstations. I feel like I'm missing about 19,000.
You're missing a whole bunch, So we have a very significant VMware Horizon View. It's not even View anymore. Horizon VDI. Shows you how long I've been doing VDI. Very significant Horizon VDI installation that's about, I believe it's about 14,000 computer objects. Usually it's about 11,000 concurrent users. And that's what our EHR and most of our primary clinical applications run on top of that Horizon VDI. So when I say a CWS is basically a thin client, it's that because it's mostly just connecting to the Horizon VDI instance that's running what we call eStar. It's Epic, along with other things that help supplement Epic and other clinical applications that we have. Okay. The remainder, which is about 7,500 endpoints, is our independent support community. So we have a variety of individuals who have very high-touch, white-glove service to specific departments, largely in the research and academic areas. The labs that maybe not be the best fit for kind of a central IT approach. So they have more bespoke service for their particular department. So that's about 7,500 devices, and there's maybe 20 different pockets of those independent support providers. So obviously what we as Central IT do a lot is partner with them whenever there's a organizational-wide change that needs to occur or whatever actions need to be taken. We actually have a regular touch point with all of them. So that makes up pretty much the predominant.
And so each of those ISPs have their own cohort of users with specific requirements, and they support them independently from central IT.
By and large, yes, and there's shades of gray there in a variety of different areas. So that's our Windows endpoint population. Mac, it's pretty minimal. Okay. Macs are largely in the IT areas, the research areas. Very, I wouldn't say that we have a really robust support of the Macs. It's more in the sub 2,000 range, and then mobile devices. We've got around 3,000 mobile endpoints that are under corporate management. Yeah. To some degree. So there are, a good number of residents have phones, for example. That's a big use case. Another big use case is our nurses have shared devices that they use for mobile communication, mobile heartbeat. So that's a pretty big overview of the landscape, and I'm sure I probably got some number wrong there somewhere.
And then, of course, there's the BYOD community.
Of course, yeah, can't forget the BYOD. So we have about 22,000 users or VUMC employees that are now registered in application protection policies, MAM. That was a big effort that obviously you helped us with earlier this year, and it's been, I think, pretty successful. I think that people really were receptive to the idea. So beyond that, we have about 4,000 BYO MDM enrolls. So people that have said, I need additional applications that you can only deliver via.
So they got their device fully enrolled and fully managed, as opposed to mobile application management only.
Exactly.
Gotcha. And then the other thing that I know is really interesting in your environment is you've got Epic, which is really the leader in the EMR space, and you're using Imprivata.
Yes, correct.
For your single sign-on solution for those kiosk
forgot
machines.
To mention it.
So that's an interesting one.
Yeah. So on our shared clinical workstations, and this is largely why one of the many reasons why they stay on domain, is that integration with Imprivata one sign product, so that they can do the badge tap in and out. Yeah. And we were, to the credit of our internal developers, we had badge tap for many years before that. We had developed our own custom product, and that obviously carried its own weight around for many years before we finally decided to move over to Imprivata. But obviously the investments in VDI that we made very early on was all about that idea of having a mobile provider, somebody that could go from room to room to room and keep a session current while just badge tapping in and out. So it's been hugely impactful, I think, to the provider community.
So you had built your own single sign-on solution in-house. And if I understand,
badge tap. I don't know how single sign-on it was. But
okay, badge tap, we'll call it. So you built that in-house, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
And if I understand correctly, from the history that I know of the organization, you also had your own in-house EMR.
Yes.
For many years before you went to
many
Epic.
years. Yep, we were pretty early on the scene. I don't know the statistics, but I want to say it was really the late 90s that it got its start in the Department of Biomedical Informatics, obviously a decade before I started there, but Star Panel was the name of that one. Yeah. And it was browser based, back in the early 2000s. Wow. That was very cutting edge.
Wow, that was.
But after 15 years, 20 years almost of that, it was time for a change, which is what the investments were into Epic 5 years ago.
So going from custom in-house to commercial off the shelf.
Right.
And then tell me what happened in the space around endpoint management. I think you may have also had an in-house homegrown endpoint management solution at some point as well?
We did. We had our own imaging. It did many things for us. One of those things was imaging.
Okay.
And you would pixie boot to the device, and you would get this menu of kind of custom page that you could have all these different inputs on. And at the time, we were doing kind of a cafeteria plan approach to support. So if your device, if your department wanted administrative rights, well, that was an additional fee, but you could have it. And there was a checkbox on this little imaging thing. You would, it's a very slick product, kind of, very similar to what you might see in ConfigMan doing the task sequence and stuff, some of the custom inputs that you can put there. But this was a whole thing on unto itself. Before it predated really modern SCCM. It was more during the SMS era, if you remember, many years ago. But that obviously, anytime you do anything custom, there's a tremendous amount of technical debt that you end up incurring over a long enough time period. that it just becomes very hard to
So you
maintain.
separated the university from the medical center, but you didn't go as far as separating out a software company to compete with Microsoft.
Right.
Which you could have.
Yeah, I don't know that VMC is necessarily the best in breed in endpoint management software design.
Or EMR design. Or whatever.
Exactly.
But it's fascinating that you had built all these solutions in-house before making I guess, a big strategic shift to buying commercial off-the-shelf software.
Yeah, really
That's a big shift.
To the credit of a lot of the visionaries that we've had in the biomedical informatics community at VUMC, they were always and still remain very cutting edge in what capabilities that they want to invest in. Some of the stuff we're doing with artificial intelligence. Every time I open our little internal reporter, I'm always just amazed and proud of the innovations.
Well, Vanderbilt's contribution to the Moderna vaccine.
Yeah.
Was it Moderna or was it Pfizer?
Mostly, it was largely Moderna, yes.
Yeah, or was it the mRNA messenger sequence or something?
No, it was more specifically the Moderna one. And
Moderna,
obviously, Dolly Parton had a big shot in the arm for helping that research get past the finish line. So,
yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Let me check my questions. Okay, so tell me a bit about your journey then, as you went into this commercial software space, your journey to Microsoft Intune, which is the area where we've been working together for a couple of years.
Sure.
Tell me a little bit about that and which use cases you really are able to manage on Intune, and then we talk about the ones you can't. So we get a realistic view of what's possible and what's real.
So for many years now, our end-user services teams have managed Windows endpoints with ConfigMan, SCCM. Like I said, it was the custom homegrown solution before that, but that transition happened probably closer around 2014, 2015.
Okay.
So it's been a while that we've been predominantly SCCM, at least for our centrally supported, the 3/4 of the devices. But obviously that's, those devices are joined to a domain that we're trying to leave. And that ConfigMan instance is shared among a few different internal customers. So I think, when we went through this this project to leave that common directory that we share with VU, it afforded us a really unique opportunity to not just lift and shift, not just try and take the things and everything that we'd done in the past and continue on and do ConfigMan in the new instance, because we understood that at the time Intune was close enough for at least some of the workloads or many of the workloads that we have. And so we really started our focus around the back office, the administrative workstations, because those are very simple from a manageability perspective, leveraging Autopilot, what was then called White Glove, now called pre-provisioning, and just going pure Azure AD, joined, no hybrid, no co-management, has been a challenge in some areas, but it's also been a blessing in others because it's almost a meme in the Intune administrator community, the hybrid Azure AD join and all the challenges that a lot of hybrid solutions face, especially when it comes to Autopilot. So it was a blessing in that it allowed us to really take a hard look at everything we were doing and say, what do we really need? We had decades worth of policy and decisions and micro decisions that had been made, and doing a domain shift affords us a great opportunity to really just use a magnifying glass to say, why are we still doing it this way? So, that was one of the areas that we focused on together really early on, was doing that evaluation in that particular use case, dissecting everything that we were doing there, and then augmenting that to Intune design as it stood at the time. And, I would say that it was pretty successful. Our very first device that we pre-provisioned went to our CIO, and she loved it. She was like, this is incredible, it's so fast. We had it with Windows Hello right away, so the sign-in experience was incredible.
Nothing like taking a small risk with the
I know,
the
right?
CIO.
It wasn't my boss, it wasn't me, it was literally the first.
Boss.
The first was the CIO, and she, she was a great advocate on our behalf, and that certainly helped get things moving along. But since then, we've mostly been focused still on our back office use cases. we made the decision to hold off or at least delay our clinical shared workstations for a number of reasons, the most predominant of which was Imprivata.
Yes.
Imprivata requires domain membership, at least the one-sign product that we have for now that I know of requires domain membership. And I don't think there was any desire at the time, and probably still is not any desire, to continue or to try and adapt that to a hybrid model. There just is not a compelling reason yet to. Now, Microsoft is making a lot of investments in the tenant attach approach and a lot of things that you can do without hybrid joining. So that may change in the not too distant future. But at the time, there really was not a compelling reason for us to take this clinical workstation, this patient critical device, and move it into Intune. We wanted to keep it on-prem because it exists as an on-prem device. Okay. You know, when people talk about moving to the cloud, you always have to have that conversation of, does this make sense in the cloud?
Yeah. Where is it going to be and why is it?
Right.
Yeah.
If you lose your WAN connection, are you okay with relying on Azure AD for authentication? You know, like those kinds of decisions that you need to make. And given the criticality of those devices, that's why we went with more of the legacy approach. But everything else that we've done so far besides those has been pure Azure AD join, Intune native, and there have been challenges there, of course, in trying to adapt the old way of thinking into the modern world.
Yeah.
You know, and
congratulations on doing that, because I think in the academic medical sector, there are many academic medical centers thinking about this and maybe piloting this. You've done it. You've crossed the bridge in a way, and so you've now got your administrative workstations on Intune native, Azure AD joined, not co-managed.
Right.
They're pure play Intune, and then you've got your clinical workstation still fully domain joined, still on config manager because of the Imprivata requirement.
Yeah, and had we not had the domain shift opportunity, I'm sure that the administrative workstations probably would have gone the hybrid approach.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot easier. I understand why people go that route. You know, you can bite off a little bit at a time. You can move certain workloads. You can slowly ease into it.
Yeah.
And I think that some of the recent advancements in ConfigMan have really made that journey a lot easier for co-management individuals. But just the ability, the value in being able to drop ship a device from a manufacturer and just gets all of its config, especially in the world that we're in right now. I mean,
amazing.
That is really a competitive advantage for that Intune-only approach.
I want to come back to that in a minute.
Sure, absolutely.
In the context of physician onboarding, because that's a huge topic.
Right.
But just to pause for a moment on that Imprivata configuration. Have you tried, or has anyone tried, doing the tenant attached configuration between an Imprivata machine that's on SCCM, tenant attaching it across to Intune? Are there any? We
have not yet. I don't think there's going to be any issues with it. I'm pretty confident that it'll work fine. Tenant attach is a very passive thing. You know, you're not enrolling the device into Intune. You're basically saying you're still managed by ConfigMan, but ConfigMan's now
from Intune, and
ConfigMan's now getting commands from Intune and then adapting those to your management with ConfigMan. So it's a lighter touch than, you know, full co-management, and there are detractors there, of course, as well. But for the use case that we have with those devices, we have not yet found a very compelling reason to actually Intune and enroll those clinical workstations because they are so unique, because they're essentially thin clients. You know, there is not a huge amount of applications running on the endpoint. It's largely just a Horizon client and a few web browser things, you know.
This may be a wacky question, but let me ask it. Is there a future where your providers are using biometrics, using their face, to log into these machines as they stand in front of each different clinical workstation?
If there was, well,
do away with tap and go.
I think that if there weren't the limitations on Windows Hello for Business, we would be further along with those considerations. You know, because Windows Hello for Business caches your biometric data in the TPM chip on the device, you're limited to 10 people. So that goes out the window almost immediately in a exam room where you got 50 people in one day. Like there may be some instances where it's possible, but we're going to be
not there
badge
today.
tapping for a while. And I wish that one of the things I would say is like it would be amazing if we could go through some massive rebadging event where we picked up a badge that was Windows Hello for Business capable. Our current HID badge is not, unfortunately. It doesn't have some special chip. I don't remember the RFID details, but that is one area that obviously Imprivata plays, is in the ability to work with lots of different HID badges and adapt that to an identity and have that identity then transfer through applications and things. They're still pretty, I don't know, they're fairly unique in the marketplace in that capability, in that I would love for Windows Hello to be a capable replacement there, but it's going to take a lot. Maybe I don't know if it's a storage limit on TPM chips or whatever the case may be, but I don't foresee us moving to face logins until those limitations are removed.
Yeah. Fair enough. So that was really good. That was really useful, kind of sharing the journey you've been on and where you're still on Config Man or SCCM and where you're now on Intune. Can you tell us a little bit about the journey for all your mobile endpoints, your tablets and your smartphones, both the BYO and the corporate ones, and maybe talk a little bit about where you were with the Airwatch product, where you are now with Intune, what you lost, if anything, what you gained, if anything?
Yeah, okay. I will preface it by saying I was never a member of the team that did our internal Airwatch support. So this is going to be through the lens of...
You were at Airwatch at the time?
More so on the VDI team, working on our virtual desktop team. So this is going to be through the lens of our MDM engineers. So take it with a grain of salt. I'm sure they'll have their own input if they listen to this. So I would say that our investment into Airwatch early on was largely centered around a few use cases. The most predominant of which was the mobile heartbeat initiative, getting pagers out of the inpatient areas and moving to a messaging platform, mobile heartbeat in this case, and using, I think at the time they were iPod Touches and then moved to iPhones. No, I think they started as iPhone 5s. It's been a while. But shared devices that didn't have cellular connection, and they were very much just a nurse picks it up, signs in a mobile heartbeat. They've got their communication device. It's not really used for a whole lot besides that. So that was largely what kicked off it, but also at the same time doing a push for mobile device management with BYO. And what we found very quickly was that the concepts around enrolling your personal device, that your work is not paying for, that they are not giving you a stipend for, that they are, you don't want them to have any control over, was not particularly palatable, particularly in a lot of the attending communities and I should say a large variety of different individuals. So we reached, after about 2.5, 3 years, I can't remember exactly when we started the BYO initiative. I wasn't involved at the time, but it was, I want to say somewhere around the 3-year mark of doing that, there was this thought that, hey, we really need to just put a line in the sand to say, look, if you want access to email, you got to enroll. And this is the date, and if you're not going to enroll, you lose access to email.
So it was full enrollment on Airwatch MDM.
Right. And as it became closer to time, it became very clear that only about a third of the population that was using email had gone through with that. So the stay of execution, if you will, was decided upon, and we wanted to take a different approach. We had kind of had some ideas about what app protection policies could do with Intune and how we could pivot that direction. We were also reconsidering our, license investments and other things that we had made in the products. Airwatch, they were kind of that first to market, not really first to market, but basically the biggest.
Yeah, very solid.
Very solid footing, and ton of capabilities. Really the default when people talk about mobile device management, Airwatch is kind of synonymous with that. So we knew that, I think, by choosing to migrate to the MDM side of Intune, kind of leaving MAM on the side for a second here, that we were probably going to be losing some capabilities. Just Intune is obviously not as mature a product. It hasn't been around for as long. It hasn't had quite as much investment in development as maybe what VMware has done with Airwatch, now Workspace ONE. So I think we kind of went in eyes open, but at the same time, our use cases were not so complex that it really justified keeping a completely separate management platform from our other devices. And so I think that the unified endpoint management concepts, that idea of having that single pane of glass that you've got all your devices in, really, was attractive and allowed itself to be some of the reason why we went with Intune. Obviously, making use of our Microsoft 365 investment was a big part of that decision. And we decided, or our leadership decided a while ago, to really codify that relationship and make it a kind of a strategic partnership with Microsoft and say, let's move as much as we can. Let's make as much of the investment in our Microsoft licensing as we have, because we're going to have it for Office regardless. Let's use as much as the rest that we can. So, if there are other people that are in the Airwatch bag today and making that consideration, Airwatch is a very capable product. I keep calling it Airwatch. I really should call it Workspace ONE, because I was part of the team when it transitioned.
Everybody still knows it as Airwatch.
Workspace ONE, where VMware has made a lot of investments, is in some really cool technologies and being able to do things in a unique way that I think only VMware could do. But at the end of the day, the ability to manage an endpoint with the workloads and needs that we had, there was not I should be cautious in saying this. There are things that Workspace ONE does that is easier to do in Workspace ONE than it is in Intune. Some of that has to do with the fact that it's a more mature product. Some of that has to do with the fact that it's the default that system integrators go to. So when you think of like Imprivata bought Ground Control, for example, Ground Control can do all kinds of cool stuff with Workspace ONE. With Intune, it can do some of those things. It can't do all of those things.
Do the shared device management, for example.
Exactly.
Check in, check out function.
Yeah, and I think that that was obviously a decision our leadership needed to make of balancing. Are those capabilities worth whatever that investment is? Right, exactly. And we obviously still maintain a very good and close relationship with VMware. I have a ton of Horizon product, but I think in the endpoint management space, it's become clear that Microsoft is taking it much more seriously in the last 2 years than maybe they did. I didn't know this. Intune is 10 years old. Did you know that?
Yeah, it was called Intune it was called Windows Intune initially.
Right.
It was pretty rough.
Yeah, well, I know they went through a massive rewrite, and it's become clear to me through Steve Dispenza's direction, the VP of Product Management at Microsoft, it's over MEM, that they're really taking it seriously. They're really investing a lot of resources into making it work. It's just, it hasn't had the time, obviously, that the Workspace ONE has had. So.
Yeah. It's been interesting for us to observe it as well, because we did an RFP in 2010 to choose a mobile device management vendor, and we chose Airwatch, which became
in 2010.
Leader.
Are we going to mobile iron?
Well, that was an option, right?
Sorry to mobile.
And there was one called Fancy Phone, and there was a whole bunch of other contenders, but we chose Airwatch, and it's been a rock solid product, really rock solid. And Intune was a bit rough along the way, but Intune is now, I feel like now we're at a point in history where you can credibly manage all your endpoints from one system, being Intune, Windows, Macs, iPads, iPhones, Androids, and you can manage your BYO devices much better with Intune than you ever could with Airwatch or Mobile Iron or anything else because of the application protection policies.
Yeah, I would say Intune's to me, Intune has their biggest two competitive advantages are Windows management. Obviously, it's Microsoft. You would hope that they're good at managing their own operating system. A lot of stuff that you can do with Autopilot, just all that capability. And you can get that to some degree with other MDM platforms, but there's always a rough edge. There's always a yes, but that it's just not quite as easy. So Windows, of course, one would hope they're good at. App protection policies is really the other really big feather in their cap. Again, because it's their applications, they can do these kinds of things. They can open up the APIs. They can make it work so that when you have a population of when you're going to your enterprise customer like us, and they've got a population of users who are resistant to device enrollment, as ours were, it's a much easier conversation to sell that light touch of, well, just go download whatever app you want and sign in. There's no enrollment. You see a brief registration prompt, but that's about it. It's much easier to sell to a user community who, at the end of the day, you probably just really care about email security. In Teams probably too, in OneDrive now that more people are getting on that. But the content security is really what's important. And if you're moving that direction with Microsoft in those spaces, MAM's a really strong competitive advantage versus the other platforms where here's your full device enroll.
And you have all that friction between IT and the users.
Exactly.
Whereas now, think of a day in the life of a clinical worker at VUMC. They've got Teams, they've got Outlook, any of the Office applications on an unmanaged personal device.
Right.
The data is secure
in
a managed app, but the device is still completely off limits to VUMC. So the user is assured of their privacy, but VUMC is assured they can protect patient data.
Exactly.
That's a beautiful solution. Go back to that conversation around Autopilot for a moment. So you're able to order new Windows machines.
Yes, we have had technical capability in what IT can do, and then procurement capability are obviously two different things. So if anybody is wanting to move that direction of being able to go to your device manufacturer and order a device and have it go wherever and be fully configured and everything, start those conversations really early, because you may find internally that changing procurement practices and legal, all the things that go along that are a significant drag to the ability. Because it's not just the technical capability, it's all of the other procurement practices that go with it. So we are not there yet. I would love to get to the point where we're going to our device vendor and saying, here's our group tag, and they can ship it anywhere on the planet, and it's got our config, and we're ready to go. There are other intersecting projects. We're doing a big ERP replacement that has kind of put a stay on a lot of work that would otherwise get done. But if I had any advice to somebody that is looking at Intune, I would say talk to your device partners real early and get your ducks in a row there so that you can execute. Because that is really where Intune flies, is in your ability to have the confidence that when you ship a device from the vendor to the user, they got everything they need. Like that's evolutionary in its capabilities.
And I'm sad in a way that all the supply chain issues and the ERP issues have hindered the progress there. It sounds like all the technical parts are in place.
Right.
It's the non-technical parts, because where we have seen this work, it's unbelievably cool shipping us directly to the end user.
Absolutely.
Putting in their AD credentials, the OneDrive content coming down, their security policies.
We're close.
Let's get over that line.
Yep.
That's great. And then for the devices that are on Intune, you're obviously managing all the OS update process.
Yeah, so there's been a learning curve with, we were going from our legacy, kind of domain join systems were WSUS for updates, and you lose a lot of fine-tuned control when you go to Windows Update for Business. It's better in that you have a lot more, using Update Compliance Dashboard and a lot of the different tools that they have now to be able to see at a state level all of the devices, what status they are in, what compliance that they have with those update policies. But up until very recently, it was challenging to do a 0-day patch. An out-of-band print nightmare, for example, was really the first opportunity that we had to deploy their expedited quality updates that they rolled out to Intune earlier this year. Before that, it was kind of just I hope it gets the update when it gets it. It was, there was really, we're talking within the last 4 months that this capability has really come online. And I know that a lot of the product managers at Microsoft who are on the Intune team, I think some of them came from the Windows Update team, so they're really working hard on improving that. But it's now to a point where I can actually say, well, these devices need to get this patch ASAP, and ignore whatever update ring cadence that I've set, deferrals that I've set, whatever. You need this now, and get a lot more aggressive with it.
Yeah,
that has been a big learning curve because Windows for Update for Business, you're getting your updates from at the same update source that consumers are. You don't have as much fine-tooth control as you do with WSUS, but at the same time, it's the same dog food that you're getting across the planet, right?
And what about application updates? How are you managing those?
Not well, to be honest. I think that's really where you really want to look at partners like Patch My PC is a really big player in that space. Chocolatey. There's a couple different third-party tools that can make patching and updating third-party applications less painful. Because obviously, and this is true with SCCM too, the time investment in updating packages, especially like Adobe Reader with all the subversions that they have, and Chrome, and all the big things that people have.
Frequency.
And the frequency. The ROI for things like Patch My PC just writes itself. It's that would be another big thing that I would tell really anybody who hasn't yet looked into those things is like, if you're going to take your Windows update seriously, you really want to take your third-party application patching seriously too, because those CVEs happen frequently and they're often overlooked. How many people have those things baked into their images and they update it once a year maybe?
It's not often enough.
No, exactly.
What's missing? If you think about the functionality and the capabilities that you have with Intune today for all the use cases and devices you're managing, and the scale of the organization you have, and the diversity where you still have these independent support providers, what's missing, or what would you like to see in the Intune solution?
Yeah, so you bring up our independent support providers. It's been a real challenge trying to bend Intune into the idea of not quite hierarchical management, but pockets of management. Missing is definitely hierarchical management. Having the ability to, set a policy at an OU layer that goes several layers below that is gone. You really have to target your device groups now and say, you need to be a member of this device group and get this assignment. And they're massaging things a bit, and dynamic device groups make things a little easier than necessarily managing specific membership device groups. But it's still a big challenge to try and have multiple different internal customers consuming the same tenant, the same subscription, and not impacting each other. So we spent, my team, we spent a very long time trying to make sure that we had our RBAC in place the right way, that we had our scopes the right way, groups, tags, etc., such that we could onboard a community of independent support providers and have them all capable of enrolling and managing their own devices, applying their own configuration, potentially their own applications to those devices, while also consuming a baseline configuration that meets organizational standards, and doing so in a way that they will not negatively impact each other's configuration. The OU boundaries of the past made it that very easy. If your computer object wasn't in the OU, then you couldn't do anything with it. Like if you didn't have OU rights, there was nothing you were doing to it. In Intune land, it's flat. There's no concept of that structure. So we've kind of developed this model, if you will, of turning what is essentially a dynamic device group into an OU. And user groups and other things into that similar concept of I need to bucketize a administrator and his or her devices, and I need to make sure that those are not impacted by somebody else who I want to have equal capabilities just on a different device population set.
Yeah.
Like Intune was not designed with that in mind.
Okay.
I know they're making investments in that regard. I would love to see them do something with, because they've got administrative units in Azure AD. Maybe that could be adapted to some device concept. I don't know, but I think that's a big missing piece for large organizations, especially in academic medical centers where central IT does not have 100%. I'm sure that there are many who have even less than the 75% that we do.
Yeah.
So
especially academic medical centers that are still part of the university organization.
Yeah, especially, right.
They're complex organizations, and you generally don't have central IT that rules the roost.
If we still had all the schools of the university, that would be a much lower number.
Yeah, it really would. It really would. Okay, that's really interesting that capability is something that's still needed. Any other advice you'd like to share with academic medical centers who are embarking on this journey, want to modernize the way they manage endpoints, and any words of wisdom or any share you'd like to make?
So there's a motto that I like, which is progress unencumbered by custom. It was actually the motto, I think, of one of the early Air Force Command schools that they had. Progress unencumbered by custom. And that's really what the approach that you really have to take when looking at mountains of technical debt that many of us have and trying to adapt that into a modern workspace. You don't want to be so encumbered by customs.
By the history.
You really want to take that magnifying glass and ask why. Why are we doing it this way? Why are we putting this desktop shortcut on? Why are we mapping this drive? Why are we mapping this printer? Why are we doing it the way that we're doing it? Is there a better way to do these things? And that will open doors into kind of the second big suggestion that I have, which is get active in the Intune community. There is a very prolific and intelligent and incredibly helpful community around Microsoft Endpoint Manager, but more specifically in Intune. I think that the Microsoft MVPs really fill a lot of gaps in maybe documentation or articles or areas that maybe, when you look at the Intune customer success blog, it leaves a lot to be desired, especially compared to some of their competitors of like, here's a use case, here's how we're going to solve that use case. They do some of those things, but really the Microsoft MVP community is where you'll find a ton of that knowledge of, here's the challenge I had to solve, here's how I did it, I made this Azure AD app, or it could involve other aspects of that Microsoft 365 platform. The other thing that I would say, besides those two things, is if you're not also moving to OneDrive, to Teams, to SharePoint Online, do that too, because that makes it a lot easier. If you're trying to map network drives and keep user data still on devices, or on map network drives for that matter, figure out why you're still doing it that way and try to move your data at the same time, because it's a much easier conversation to an end user if you say, we're really investing in this platform.
Yeah.
Intune is just one component of an entire ecosystem that is really all centered around that concept of making you more effective at working, no matter where you are, no matter what device you have, no matter what the conditions of that device might be. And if you're going to just choose to eat part of the elephant, it's going to probably have a sour taste. You got to really eat the whole elephant.
Go all in.
Yeah.
That's great advice. There are 3 great nuggets, actually.
Yeah.
Kevin, thank you.
Thank you.
This has been outstanding.
Yep. Cheers.
I'm vaccinated, so you say we can shake hands. Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you.